Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins beneath the emerald canopy of the Woodland Realm, where the stars shone faintly through ancient boughs and silver streams wove quiet songs through the mossy earth. The last Elven King stood alone, Thranduil, son of Orifer, ruler of the fading kingdom of Arran Lascallon. Once known as Mirkwood, he felt the weight of centuries pressing upon him. His realm, once vibrant with song and laughter, had grown still, like the hush before a storm. The elves were leaving. For thousands of years their voices had filled these halls, their hands had tended these trees, and their feet had danced upon the soft earth of their homeland. But now the call of the sea was strong, and one by one they sailed west to the Undying Lands, beyond the reach of time and shadow. The mighty halls of the Woodland Realm, carved deep into the roots of the earth, stood ever grand, but their glow had dimmed. The once bustling passages echoed with silence, and even the firelight seemed subdued, as if mourning those who had left. Thranduil remained. For what was a king without a people? What was a kingdom without its beating heart? He stood upon his high balcony, his keen eyes sweeping across the boundless expanse of trees stretching into the twilight. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the whisper of falling leaves. The world was changing. The dominion of men had begun, and the age of elves was fading like a candle in the wind. Yet the forest still called to him. It had been his home since the days of his youth, when he had walked these lands alongside his father. Orifer had been proud, noble, and unyielding, leading his kin into battle against the Dark Lord in the War of the Last Alliance. Thranduil could still hear the clash of swords, the cries of the fallen, and the thunder of marching orcs beneath the banners of Sauron. He had been there, young yet hardened by war, standing beside his father when Orifer fell upon the blackened fields of Dagorlad. He had sworn then, with the blood of his kin staining the ground beneath his feet, that he would protect their people and their home, that the Woodland Realm would endure, no matter the cost. But now there were so few left. A gentle wind stirred the branches, and Thranduil closed his eyes, listening. He could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of the river, and beyond that, a faint echo. The memory of voices long gone. The laughter of Legolas in his youth. The songs of his people as they wove garlands of golden flowers. The deep, solemn prayers spoken in the shadows of old trees. All of it fading. A quiet step sounded behind him. "Your Grace," came a soft voice. Thranduil turned to see Galion, his most trusted attendant, standing in the doorway, his face etched with the sorrow that all in the Woodland Realm carried. "A message has arrived from Lothlórien." Thranduil's fingers tightened around the carved railing of the balcony. Lothlórien, too, was emptying. The Lady Galadriel had departed. Celeborn lingered still, but his heart was already set on the west. The golden wood would soon stand silent, its song lost to the world of men. Thranduil inclined his head, a silent command to continue. "There are whispers," Galion hesitated, "of movement in the south. The ruins of Dol Guldur stir." The name sent a shadow through Thranduil's mind. Dol Guldur, the once foul fortress where the Necromancer had dwelt, where darkness had clung like poison to the roots of the world. It had been cast down, its evil purged, but evil had a way of lingering in the forgotten places of Middle-earth. "Who carries this warning?" Thranduil asked, his voice calm as the still surface of a lake. "An elf of Lorien, a scout. He rode with haste and begs an audience." Thranduil turned back to the forest, his mind a storm of thought. This land was his charge, even if most of his kin had left. Even if the world moved on without him, he would not let the darkness rise again, not while he still had breath in his body. "Bring him to me," he commanded. Galion bowed and departed. For a long moment, Thranduil stood in silence, gazing into the depths of his woodland kingdom. He had ruled through the long years of war and peace, through the coming and falling of shadows. He had seen the world change before, but never had he felt it shifting so keenly as now. As the first stars began to glimmer in the twilight, he breathed in the cool night air and whispered to the trees, to the spirits of his people who had gone before him, "I will not forsake this land." Far beyond the trees, where the ruins of Dol Guldur lay shrouded in mist, something stirred in the darkness. The hall of Thranduil was vast, carved deep into the very roots of the forest, where walls of ancient stone gleamed softly in the light of enchanted lanterns, their glow imitating the golden haze of autumn's last warmth. The scent of earth, damp with the memory of rain, lingered in the air, mingling with the crisp fragrance of pine and oak. It was a place of old majesty, hewn from the bones of the land itself, a sanctuary where the echo of ages past whispered through the arches. Here the weight of history was felt in every carved pillar, in every winding passage that led deeper into the heart of the mountain. It was a place of refuge, a fortress against time. But time had begun to press upon it, creeping in like ivy along the stone, seeking to reclaim what had once stood beyond its reach. Thranduil moved through the great hall with measured steps, his long robes brushing against the polished stone floor, his silver circlet gleaming under the flickering light of the torches. He was a figure of cold grace, his face untouched by the years in the way of the Eldar, yet his eyes bore the weight of centuries. His people called him timeless, but even the timeless could feel the slow erosion of all they had built. As he ascended the high steps to his throne, the silence of the hall seemed deeper than it had in centuries past. Once, these chambers had been filled with song, harps, and flutes, voices raised in celebration of the stars, the world, and the endless beauty of life. Now, silence reigned, broken only by the distant sound of water trickling through the hidden veins of the mountain, like the heartbeat of a slumbering giant. The doors groaned open, heavy with age and memory, and into the great hall stepped the elf from Lothlórien. He was clad in a travel-stained cloak, his boots damp with the night's dew, and the weariness in his gaze spoke of long roads and troubled tidings. He knelt before the Elven King, pressing a hand to his chest in reverence, though his eyes, sharp and keen as a falcon, met Thranduil's own without hesitation. "You bring word from the Golden Wood," Thranduil said, his voice low and steady, like a river moving beneath ice. "Tell me, does Celeborn still walk beneath the Malorn, or has he too forsaken these shores?" The scout rose, his expression shadowed. "The Lord of Lothlórien lingers still, but not for long. The havens call to him, and the golden trees whisper of his coming departure. Soon the wood shall stand empty, and the memory of the Galadrim shall fade as mist upon the river." He hesitated, glancing toward the high arches overhead as though afraid the very walls might hear his next words. "But the forest does not rest easy, my lord. There are things that stir in the ruins of Dol Guldur, things that should not be." The name of that cursed place hung in the air like the scent of something long buried, unearthed once more to fester in the light. Thranduil's fingers tightened upon the arm of his throne, his nails pressing into the smooth, time-worn wood. "Dol Guldur," he murmured, and the words felt heavy upon his tongue, like ash. He had seen its rise long ago, when the Necromancer had spread his shadow over the land, twisting the trees and poisoning the very roots of the world. He had seen its fall, too, when the White Council had driven the darkness from its walls, tearing the sorcery from its foundations like rot from a wound. But evil had a way of lingering, of sinking deep into the marrow of the world, waiting. "Speak plainly," he commanded, though his voice was quieter now, colder. "What have you seen?" The elf hesitated, then stepped forward, his brow furrowed with something close to unease. "It is no longer the fortress it once was," he said, his voice laced with a strange reluctance, as if to utter the words was to give them power. "The towers have fallen, the stones are shattered, and the halls where the darkness once dwelt are empty. But the land itself, it is restless. The trees do not grow as they should. The earth trembles in the night as if something beneath it stirs, and the wind that blows through that valley carries whispers, my lord, whispers that do not belong to the living." Thranduil said nothing for a long moment. The torches flickered, casting shadows that wavered upon the walls, shifting like figures dancing at the edge of sight. He had spent an age fighting the creeping dark, had seen what it could do to land and mind alike. He had known the weight of grief when his father fell, had tasted the bitterness of war and the slow erosion of all that was fair in the world. And now, at the very end of the age, when all should be quiet, when all should be fading into the west with the ships that bore his kindred beyond the reach of sorrow, now the darkness threatened once more to rise from the bones of the earth. He exhaled slowly, a breath like the wind before the storm. "The dominion of men has begun," he said at last, more to himself than to the elf before him. "The Eldar depart, and Middle-earth is left to its fate. That is the way of things. But this land still stands, this forest yet breathes, and I will not see it fall to shadow again." The scout inclined his head. "Then you will act?" Thranduil's gaze lifted to the vast expanse of his hall, to the carved trees upon the pillars, their golden leaves forever caught in the frozen embrace of stone. He had watched over this realm for longer than most could remember. He had seen the rise and fall of kings, had stood upon battlefields drenched in blood, and had felt the weight of grief settle upon him like the first frost of winter. And yet he remained. When all others left, he remained. "I will act," he said, and there was steel in his voice now, a quiet promise that echoed through the chamber like the toll of a distant bell. "But not rashly. If Dol Guldur stirs once more, then we must know what darkness lingers there, and we must tread carefully, lest we awaken something best left undisturbed." The scout bowed. "Then I will return, my lord, and see that our eyes remain upon the ruins." Thranduil's gaze lingered upon the farthest shadows of the hall, where the firelight did not reach. "Do so," he said, and tell me everything you see." The elf turned, his footsteps light upon the stone, and soon the great doors closed behind him, leaving the hall once more in silence. Thranduil remained upon his throne, unmoving, his thoughts drifting like leaves upon a river. The world had changed, and he had endured it all. But for how much longer? He had lived through the fall of kingdoms, had stood at the edge of ruin, and refused to be swept away. He had built walls around his heart as surely as he had built them around his realm. But even the strongest walls could not hold forever. And deep in the south, beneath the crumbling stones of Dol Guldur, something watched. The hall stood silent long after the scout had departed, its ancient pillars casting long shadows against the polished stone where the torchlight flickered as if caught between wakefulness and slumber. Thranduil remained motionless upon his throne, his thoughts spiraling through the depths of time, drifting through the labyrinth of memory where sorrow and duty intertwined like the roots of old trees. The weight of ages pressed upon his shoulders, not in the form of years, for elves did not bear time as men did, but in the gradual erosion of all that was familiar. He had watched the world shift, had seen the slow unraveling of the Eldar's dominion, and the diminishing of their splendor like the light of a setting sun sinking into an endless horizon. And now, at the very edge of twilight, he found himself a lone sentinel in a world that was no longer his. Outside, the forest murmured with the restless sigh of wind weaving through ancient boughs, stirring the crisp scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. The trees whispered, though fewer now heard their voices. Once, the elves of Greenwood had walked beneath the boughs, their hands tracing the rough bark, their songs woven into the rustling of leaves, binding them to the land as closely as roots to the soil. But now so many had gone. The paths they had once trod lay undisturbed, their laughter had faded into silence, and the golden lanterns that had once glowed beneath the canopy of stars now flickered in half-empty halls. It was not grief that tightened around Thranduil's heart, for he had made peace with loss long ago. No, it was something colder and something deeper. A sense of quiet inevitability, like the final leaf that falls from a tree long after autumn is past, surrendering at last to winter's embrace. Footsteps echoed through the chamber, slow and deliberate, breaking the stillness as Galion approached, his face set in solemn contemplation. He had served Thranduil for centuries, and though the years left no mark upon his fair features, his eyes had grown heavy with the weight of the world's slow decay. He halted a few steps before the throne, bowing his head slightly before speaking. "My lord, you have heard the tidings from Lorien. What is to be done?" Thranduil exhaled softly, his gaze drifting toward the carved roots upon the pillars, their twisting shapes mirroring the endless dance of fate, always growing, always reaching, yet bound by the weight of the past. "The world moves on, Galion. The tide recedes, and the Eldar with it. There was a time when we stood as lords of these lands, when our people flourished beneath the stars, untouched by the shadow of men or the greed of dwarves. But that time has passed, and I, it seems, am left to watch the end." His voice was quiet, but within it lay the echo of something old and unyielding, something not yet ready to bend to the wind of change. Galion's brow furrowed, and for a moment he hesitated, as if weighing whether his words were fit to speak. But at last he lifted his gaze. "And yet, my lord, you do not leave. The ships wait, the havens call, and still you remain. You speak of endings, Yet you linger in this place as though it were not the world that is fading, but yourself. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Thranduil's eyes, and for a moment the weight of ages settled upon him, casting a shadow deeper than the darkness beyond the borders of his realm. "Because I remember," he said at last, his voice softer now, tinged with something almost weary. "I remember the first time I set foot upon these lands, when greenwood stretched from the misty mountains to the river's edge, when my father stood beside me and swore that here we would endure. I remember the first great war, when we marched to Dagorlad, young and proud, believing that our strength was enough to challenge the tide of shadow. I remember the bodies upon the battlefield, the blood upon my hands, my father falling beneath the banners of Mordor while the sky burned above us. And I remember returning home to a kingdom that no longer felt whole, to a people who looked to me to lead them through the long years of darkness. And I did. Through war, through loss, through the slow creeping of shadow into our borders, I remained. And if I have remained through all these things, why should I leave now?" Galion bowed his head slightly, as though in reverence, but when he spoke again, his voice carried a quiet resolve. "Because the world has changed, my lord, and even the strongest trees must bow before the storm, lest they be broken by it." Thranduil was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed upon the distant torches that lined the farthest reaches of the hall, their golden light flickering like distant stars upon a darkened sea. When at last he spoke, his words carried the weight of something unspoken, something only he could truly understand. "Then let it break me if it must, but I will not leave." Galion studied him for a moment longer, as if searching for something in the depths of his expression, some flicker of doubt, some hidden uncertainty, but there was none. At last he inclined his head. "Then what would you have us do?" Thranduil straightened his posture once more, that of a king, his voice once more cold and certain. "Send scouts to the ruins of Dol Guldur. If the shadow stirs, I would see it with my own eyes before I act. And double the patrols along our borders. The world may change, Galion, but our duty remains. So long as I am king, the Woodland Realm shall not be left unguarded." Galion nodded and stepped back, his departure swift and silent, like a ghost vanishing into the dark. Thranduil remained alone, his gaze lingering upon the great carvings that lined the walls, upon the twisting patterns of gold and silver that adorned his halls, each telling a story older than many kingdoms of men. The silence stretched, and in that silence he heard the voice of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the soft sigh of the wind as it moved through the glades, the distant echo of water upon stone. He had once believed the world immutable, that the stars above would shine unchanged for all eternity. But the stars had shifted, and so had the world beneath them. And yet he remained, like the last tree upon a barren hill, standing defiant against the tide of time. And in the south, beyond the borders of his realm, the ruins of Dol Guldur stood in silence, broken and forgotten. But beneath the ruins, beneath the crumbling stone and the twisted roots that had begun to reclaim the land, something moved. And in the depths of the long abandoned halls, where the darkness had once ruled and been cast out, a whisper stirred. It was faint, no louder than a breath upon the wind, yet it carried with it the promise of something old, something waiting. And the forest, though it did not yet know why, trembled. The night deepened over Erin Las Galen, its vast canopy a river of ink scattered with the pale glimmers of stars that watched the world below with cold, ancient indifference. The trees, tall and gnarled with the weight of countless years, stood in solemn witness to the hush that had settled upon the Woodland Realm, a silence not of peace, but of waiting. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, of fallen leaves that whispered as they drifted down to the moss-covered ground, of pine and resin, and something else, something more elusive, like the lingering trace of a presence just beyond the reach of sight. It was a silence that seemed to breathe, to shift like the unseen tides beneath the surface of a still lake, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Beneath the great vaulted halls of his fortress, Thranduil sat within his chambers, the dim glow of lanterns casting flickering shapes upon the polished wood and stone. The chamber was vast, yet sparsely adorned, a place of quiet contemplation. A great tapestry hung upon the wall, woven with the image of greenwood as it had once been before shadow had ever touched its borders. Golden leaves unfurling in an eternal summer, the waters of the enchanted river gleaming silver beneath the moon. He traced the edge of the tapestry with his eyes, following the weave of the golden threads, as though searching for something that had long since slipped from his grasp. He did not turn as the door behind him opened, nor did he need to, for he knew the step of the one who entered. Galion moved with the careful grace of one accustomed to bearing tidings, and there was something in the measured quiet of his approach that told Thranduil all he needed to know before a single word was spoken. He did not look away from the tapestry as he finally broke the silence. "They have returned?" Galion inclined his head, though his expression was grave. "They have, my lord." He hesitated a moment before continuing, his voice carrying the careful weight of one who knew that his words would be met with deep scrutiny. "And they bring troubling news." Thranduil finally turned, his gaze meeting that of his attendant, though his expression betrayed little of what lay beneath the surface. "Speak plainly, Galion. I have no patience for riddles tonight." Galion inclined his head slightly, as though in silent acknowledgement of the burden his king carried, and then he spoke. "The ruins of Dol Guldur are not as empty as we believed. The stones crumble, the halls lie in ruin, but something stirs beneath them. The air there is thick, heavy with a presence unseen, as though the very land itself remembers the dark hand that once ruled it. The trees that grow upon its borders bear no leaves, their roots curling like grasping fingers into the soil. And the wind—" He hesitated, as though the very memory of it unsettled him. "The wind carries voices, my lord. Whispers that have no source, no tongue, yet they linger like the breath of something that should not be." Thranduil's expression remained unreadable, though his fingers curled slightly against the arm of his chair, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed by any but those who had known him for centuries. "Did they see anything?" Galion shook his head, though his own unease was evident in the way his hands clasped behind his back, knuckles paling under the pressure. "Nothing that bore form, but the scout who ventured closest to the ruins spoke of a presence. He described it as a shadow without substance, a weight upon his chest that pressed deeper the longer he lingered. He said it was as though something was watching him, though when he turned, there was nothing." The chamber seemed colder suddenly, though no wind stirred its depths. and Thranduil sat in heavy silence, his mind tracing old paths, old wounds. Dol Guldur had been the Necromancer's lair, a festering wound upon the land where darkness had taken root and spread like a poison into the very bones of the forest. The White Council had driven its master forth, had broken its walls, had left it to ruin. But ruin did not always mean death, and darkness, true darkness, was not so easily vanquished. For a long moment, Thranduil did not speak, and when he did, his voice was quieter, colder. Do you remember the first days of the shadow, Galion? When greenwood began to darken, when the air thickened with an evil none could yet name? He did not wait for an answer, for he knew Galion did remember, as all who had dwelt in these halls did. It was subtle at first, no more than a whisper in the leaves, a hush upon the streams, as if the forest itself feared to wake something that had long slumbered. And then the sickness came. The trees grew twisted, their roots blackened, as though burned from within. The creatures of the forest became restless, their eyes wild, their cries unnatural. And then, his fingers tightened imperceptibly, then the fear took root, a fear without name, without form, yet present in every shadow, in every space just beyond the light. Galion said nothing, but his gaze was steady, knowing. You believe it has returned? Thranduil exhaled, slow and measured, as though tasting the thought before speaking it aloud. I believe that evil is not so easily banished from the world. It changes, it waits. It bides its time in the places forgotten by those who wish to forget. Dol Guldur may have fallen, but something stirs within its bones. And if we do not act, we may find that it has already taken root while we turned our gaze elsewhere. Galion shifted slightly, as though weighing his next words carefully. Then what must be done, my lord? Thranduil turned back to the tapestry, his gaze once more tracing the golden leaves that no longer grew beyond these halls, his voice low and measured. I will go. Galion's brow furrowed slightly, though he did not seem surprised. You mean to lead the scouting party yourself? Thranduil turned back to him, his expression unwavering. If the land remembers what once dwelt there, then I would see it with my own eyes. I have walked this realm longer than most who remain. If darkness lingers, I will know it. He stood, his movements slow yet purposeful, and the torches upon the walls cast long shadows as he straightened. A king not yet ready to bow before the weight of time. Gather those who will ride with me. We leave at dawn. Galion hesitated only a moment before inclining his head in silent obedience. It will be done. He turned, striding toward the door, though before he reached it he paused. My lord, he said quietly, not turning back, do you fear what you will find there? Thranduil was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting beyond the chamber, beyond the halls, beyond the walls that had shielded his realm for so long. When he spoke at last, his voice was quiet, distant, almost wistful. I do not fear the darkness, Galion. I fear what remains of me if I find nothing at all. Galion said nothing more, only bowed his head and disappeared beyond the doors, leaving Thranduil alone with his thoughts and the quiet whisper of the forest beyond. The night stretched long, and in the distance, beyond the borders of his realm, the ruins of Dol Guldur stood beneath the pale glow of the moon. And though no voice was raised, though no footsteps stirred within its crumbling halls, the darkness that lay within it did not sleep. It watched, and it waited. The dawn that followed was pale and cold, the kind that whispered of distant winters, even as the last traces of autumn still clung to the branches. The great forest of Erin Las Galen stretched in every direction, a vast and ancient expanse of towering trees whose roots wove deep into the bones of the earth. The mist had gathered thick that morning, draping itself like a spectral shroud between the trunks, muting the golden hues of the lingering leaves. The hush of early morning lay heavy upon the land, as though the world itself had drawn a breath and held it, waiting. Thranduil stood at the threshold of the forest, clad in a robe of midnight blue, embroidered with silver threads that wove the likeness of curling vines across the fine fabric. His long hair, pale as starlight, was unbound, flowing freely over his shoulders. The circlet upon his brow gleamed faintly in the dim light, its slender silver branches forming a crown both regal and subdued, a symbol of kingship worn not for ostentation, but because it had become a part of him as much as the forest he ruled. He stood with a stillness that was not idle but thoughtful, listening not only with his ears, but with something deeper, something that felt the shifting of the world as a tree feels the change in the wind before the storm. Behind him, the warriors he had chosen stood ready. They were few in number, a mere handful of his most trusted, for this was not a march to war, but an errand of knowledge, and Thranduil had long since learned that wisdom was best gathered in silence, not in numbers. Their steeds, fair and swift, waited patiently, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. Each elf bore a quiet solemnity upon his face, as though instinctively aware that this journey was not merely one of distance, but of purpose. To ride toward Dol Guldur was to ride toward the ghosts of the past, and ghosts did not always remain bound to memory. Galion stood at his side, his usual composure tempered now by something else, something quieter. He was a practical elf, bound more to duty than to sentiment, yet there was hesitation in his gaze as he regarded his king. "My lord," he said at last, breaking the silence, "there is still time to reconsider. This road leads not only to shadowed lands, but to the past, and the past has a way of demanding its due." Thranduil turned his gaze toward him, and for a moment the weight of centuries could be seen in his eyes. "The past is never silent, Galion," he said, his voice measured, each word carrying the gravity of long years. "It lingers in the stones, in the trees, in the very air we breathe. You speak as though it is a place one may turn away from, as though it is a door that may be closed. But it is not. It follows, it waits, and sometimes it rises when least expected." Galion studied him for a long moment before exhaling softly. "Then you go to meet it?" "Remains," he murmured. "The world is remains," he murmured. "The world is changing, Galion. The Eldar depart. The land itself shifts beneath our feet, and yet there are things in Middle-earth that do not change, shadows that linger, echoes that refuse to fade. I would know if this is one of them." Galion was silent for a moment before inclining his head, understanding in his eyes. "Then may the stars watch over you, my lord." Thranduil turned away, stepping toward his steed with the ease of one who had spent lifetimes in the saddle. The beast was tall and swift, its coat the color of moonlight, its eyes dark and intelligent. As he swung himself into the saddle, the others followed suit, their movements fluid, wordless. There was nothing more to say. The path had been chosen. The ride through the forest was quiet, save for the soft rhythm of hooves upon the leaf-strewn earth. The mist clung to them as they moved, swirling in their wake like the remnants of forgotten dreams. The trees here were old, their trunks bearing the scars of history, their roots thick and gnarled, twisting through the soil like the veins of some slumbering giant. The light that filtered through the canopy was pale and uncertain, shifting in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as though the forest itself was watching, measuring the passage of those who dared tread its depths. For a time, there was nothing but the journey, the steady breath of the horses, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant call of a bird that seemed strangely out of place in the quiet. But as they rode deeper, the silence began to change. It was subtle at first, no more than a shift in the air, a tension that could be felt rather than heard. The forest, which had always been alive with sound, the sighing of the wind, the whisper of leaves, the murmuring of distant streams, had begun to still. It was not the peace of an untouched glade, but the hush of something waiting. Thranduil slowed his steed, lifting a hand, and his company followed suit, drawing to a halt. The mist had thickened here, rolling between the trees like a living thing, veiling the land ahead in a shroud of uncertainty. He did not speak, but he did not need to. The others felt it too, the weight in the air, the way the very ground seemed to hold its breath. One of the warriors, a tall elf with keen eyes and hair dark as the depths of the forest, shifted in his saddle. "My lord," he murmured, his voice low and cautious. "Something is wrong." Thranduil did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, reaching out not with sight, not with sound, but with something deeper, something that had always been a part of him, as it was a part of all elves. He listened not to what was there, but to what was missing. And then he understood. The wind had stopped, not merely slowed, not merely changed direction, but ceased entirely. The trees did not stir, the leaves did not shift, the mist did not part. The air was utterly, completely still. A stillness that was unnatural. A stillness that did not belong. Thranduil opened his eyes. "We do not ride forward blindly," he said, his voice low but firm. "We dismount. We move carefully." The warriors moved as shadows, spreading their wings, their breath heavy, their eyes wide. The horses, too, sensed the change, their ears flicking, their breath heavier, though they made no sound. The warriors moved as shadows, spreading out, their hands resting lightly upon their blades, though no weapon had yet been drawn. And then, just at the edge of sight, beyond the thickening mist, there was movement. A flicker, there and gone. Not a shape, not a form, but a shift in the air itself, like the space between one heartbeat and the next. Thranduil's fingers brushed the hilt of his blade. The past, it seemed, had not remained behind. It had come to meet him. The mist had thickened into a near impenetrable shroud, swirling lazily around the towering trunks of the ancient trees, obscuring the land beyond more effectively than any wall of stone. It clung to their clothes, damp and cool against their skin, as if the air itself had grown sentient, aware of their intrusion and uncertain whether to welcome or resist them. There was no movement among the trees, no rustling of unseen creatures, no sighing of wind through the branches. Only the weight of silence pressing upon them like an unseen force. Even the horses, left tethered some distance behind, had not stirred, their usual restless shifting absent in the presence of something they could sense, but not understand. Thranduil moved forward with measured grace, his steps deliberate and soundless against the leaf-strewn ground. His warriors fanned out behind him, their hands resting lightly on the hilts of their blades, though no weapon had yet been drawn. There was no need to speak. Each of them understood the nature of the place they approached. The ruins of Dol Guldur had long been abandoned, or so it was said. But abandoned places were never truly empty. Memory lingered in the stone, in the broken pillars that still reached skyward like the skeletal remains of a fallen beast, in the shattered walls where darkness had once dwelled and been driven forth. Fingers brushed against the hilt of his fingers brushed against the hilt of his sword, but he did not draw it yet. He had lived too long to mistake the unknown for immediate danger, though instinct, old as time itself, whispered caution in the marrow of his bones. One of the elves at his side, a warrior named Lotr, exhaled slowly. "This place remembers," he murmured, his voice barely more than a breath against the quiet. "Even after all these years, it holds the weight of what once was." Thranduil did not glance at him, though he did not disagree. "Some wounds do not heal, even when the blade that inflicted them is gone," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "They scar over, perhaps, grow quieter with time, but beneath the surface the ache remains." Dol Guldur was not merely a fortress. It was an infestation, a sickness upon the land itself. Evil does not simply vanish. It lingers like a scent upon the wind, waiting for the moment when it may take root once more. Lotr hesitated, then spoke again, his tone cautious. "Do you believe it has already begun?" Thranduil exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the past is not content to remain where we left it." They pressed forward, the mist curling around them, growing denser the closer they came to the ruins. The ground beneath their feet changed, soft earth giving way to stone, cracked and worn with age. Shapes began to emerge from the haze, broken pillars, half-buried foundations. The remnants of once great archways now collapsed into forgotten rubble. Dol Guldur had never been a place of beauty, even in its height. Unlike the fair cities of the Eldar with their flowing architecture and light-filled halls, this had been a place of shadow, of iron and darkness and power, built not to shelter, but to command. And yet, for all its ruin, the air here was not dead. Something stirred beneath the surface, something unseen but not unfelt, a weight pressing upon them from all directions. One of the elves, a scout who had gone on ahead, reappeared from the mist, his expression troubled. "My lord," he said, dipping his head respectfully, "there is something you must see." Thranduil nodded and followed, his warriors falling into step beside him as they moved deeper into the ruins. The ground sloped downward, revealing a clearing where once a great courtyard had stood. The remains of a great arch still lingered, its edges crumbled, but its intent unmistakable. Here, in the center of the ruins, lay a formation that had not been there before. At first glance, it seemed nothing more than a circle of broken stones scattered haphazardly across the clearing. But as Thranduil stepped closer, His sharp eyes traced the lines with growing unease. This was no random scattering. The stones had been arranged, not by time, not by nature, but by purpose. Leiron knelt, brushing his fingers lightly over one of the slabs. "These marks," he murmured, his voice tight, "they are not old." Thranduil's gaze darkened as he took in the symbols carved into the stone, lines intersecting in deliberate patterns, ancient runes that did not belong to elves, nor to men, nor even to dwarves. They were older than the written tongues of the free peoples, older than even the first days of the Second Age. They were symbols of something deeper, something buried beneath history, beneath memory, waiting to rise again. "This is not the work of time," Thranduil said at last, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "Someone, something, has been here." Galion, who had remained silent until now, took a step closer, his usual composure strained. "What do these marks mean, my lord?" Thranduil did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, reaching beyond the physical, beyond sight and sound, listening not to the present, but to the echoes that still lingered here. He had walked these lands for an age, had felt the presence of darkness before, had known its weight in the very air, in the way the trees ceased their whispering when it passed. And here, in this place where ruin should have been final, he felt it again. A presence not strong, not yet whole, but growing like the first tendrils of rot seeping into a once healthy tree. At last he opened his eyes. "It is a calling," he said, his voice steady but grave. "A summoning of something that should remain buried. The question is, who has done this, and to what end?" Galion's gaze flickered over the ruins, his expression unreadable. "Do you believe the darkness is already returned?" Thranduil studied the symbols once more, then turned his gaze to the mist beyond, where the land fell away into deeper shadow. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we stand at the edge of something not yet awoken. But if we do not act, it will wake. And when it does, it will not do so in silence." The mist swirled around them, shifting like breath in the cold air. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the reach of their sight, something moved. Not seen, not heard, but present. Watching. Waiting. The mist had settled thick and heavy around the ruins, its silver tendrils weaving through the broken stone like the fingers of something unseen, grasping, feeling, lingering. The light was dim, a pale, cold glow filtering weakly through the haze, casting shadows that stretched and shifted as if reluctant to remain still. The air carried an almost tangible weight, thick with the damp scent of decayed stone, of old rainwater pooled in forgotten crevices, of something deeper, something more elusive, like the breath of a slumbering beast stirring in its lair. Thranduil stood at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed upon the arcane symbols carved into the stones, their edges still sharp against the erosion of time. The arrangement was not chaotic. It was deliberate, purposeful. Someone had been here recently, and whatever their intent had been, it was unfinished. His warriors remained close, their forms half obscured by the veil of mist that clung stubbornly to the ruins. Their expressions were unreadable, but the tension in their stance, the way their hands lingered near their weapons, betrayed an unease that no words could mask. Even the forest, ever watchful, seemed to recoil from this place. The trees nearest to the ruins stood bare, their gnarled branches twisted and brittle, their roots knotted upon themselves as if attempting to retreat from the cursed ground. It was as though life itself had abandoned this place, unwilling to stake any further claim upon the tainted land. Galion stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over the stones with careful scrutiny. His voice, though calm, carried an edge of thoughtfulness. "These runes, my lord, I have not seen their like before. They do not belong to any tongue spoken among the free peoples, nor do they resemble the crude marks of orc kind. Their shapes are unsettling. There is something unnatural about them, as if they do not belong to this world." He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of one of the carvings. "And they are fresh. Whatever was begun here, it was not long ago." Thranduil's gaze did not waver from the runes, nor did his expression betray whatever thoughts stirred within him. "There are words older than any tongue spoken in Middle-earth today, Galion. Languages that have no place in the songs of elves or the records of men, for they were not meant to be known, only buried. Some knowledge is a poison that seeps into the mind, corrupts the will. There were those who once sought power through such words, who thought to bend the unseen forces of the world to their desires, but those who spoke them seldom lived to see what they had awakened." His voice was quiet, contemplative, but beneath it lay something harder, something colder. Dol Guldur was not only a fortress, it was a vessel for something greater. Power does not die with its master, nor does it simply dissipate. It lingers, waiting for the hands that would wield it once more. Lordoftherings, who had remained silent until now, shifted slightly, his brow furrowed. "You believe this is an attempt to reclaim what was lost?" Thranduil exhaled slowly, his breath curling in the chill air. "Nothing that was once strong enough to shroud an entire forest in shadow can be so easily lost, Lordoftherings. It was driven out, broken perhaps, but not destroyed. Shadows, once cast, do not simply vanish. They stretch, they fade, but they do not die." His fingers brushed absently over the hilt of his sword, though he did not yet draw it. "And if there are those who still seek the remnants of that power, then they are either blind to what they summon, or they welcome it." A silence stretched between them, the kind that was not empty, but filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts, the quiet hum of understanding that did not need to be voiced to be known. The ruins seemed to lean closer around them, the mist thickening as if it too was listening. Galion glanced toward the distant archway, the remnants of Dol Guldur's entrance, half collapsed, yet still standing as though defying time itself. His voice was softer when he spoke next. "And if they succeed..." Thranduil's gaze remained distant for a long moment before he answered. "Then the world will remember why it once feared this place." The mist curled at their feet as they moved deeper into the ruins, the broken stone shifting beneath their steps with a sound that was swallowed almost instantly by the unnatural hush of the air. They walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but with the careful precision of those who understood that unseen dangers were often far greater than those that revealed themselves. The ruins of Dol Guldur had always been a place of oppression, of suffocating malice. But now there was something different. It was not the overwhelming presence of a great and terrible force, but rather an absence, an emptiness that did not feel like relief, but like the stillness before a storm. As they reached the remnants of what had once been the fortress's inner hall, they halted. The chamber had been reduced to rubble, its once lofty ceiling now open to the sky, where the mist drifted like pale smoke through the cracks in the stone. But it was not the ruin itself that had drawn their attention. In the center of the shattered hall, upon a raised platform where once a throne had stood, something lay upon the stone. A book, bound in darkened leather, its edges charred as if it had been plucked from the heart of a fire. Thranduil stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. The air around the book felt wrong. It was not a thing of great size or intricate craftsmanship, not adorned with jewels or runes that glowed with power. And yet it exuded something intense, tangible, something wrong. It was a relic of a time best forgotten, of knowledge best left buried. He did not reach for it, not yet. Galion, standing a step behind him, frowned deeply. "My lord, do not touch it." Thranduil's gaze remained fixed upon the book. "Do you think I do not know what lies within such things, Galion?" His voice was quiet, almost distant. "Knowledge is like a blade. It may cut through the darkness, but it may also wound the hand that wields it. And some wounds do not heal." Lordoftherings shifted slightly, his unease evident. "Then we should not linger here. If this is what they sought, then we must assume they will return for it." Thranduil exhaled, his eyes narrowing slightly. "No," he murmured. "Whoever came here did not leave of their own will. Look around you, Lordoftherings. There are no footprints, no signs of a hurried departure. They did not leave." His voice was softer now, colder. "They never had the chance to." A hush settled over them, the realization sinking like a stone into deep water. The ruins did not merely feel abandoned. They felt hungry, as if something had come before them, had taken what it wished, and had left no trace of those who had dared to call it forth. Thranduil's fingers tightened slightly. "We take it," he said at last, his voice steady and decisive. "If it is left here, others will find it, and they will not have the wisdom to fear it as they should. We will return it to the Woodland Realm where it may be watched, where it will not be wielded by hands too foolish to know the price of power." Galion hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "As you will, my lord." Thranduil reached forward, his fingers brushing the leather cover. The moment his skin met the surface, the air shifted, not violently, not with sound or movement, but with something deeper, something colder. The mist thickened, the silence deepened, and from the darkness of the ruins, unseen and formless, something watched. The past had been disturbed, and it would not remain quiet. Like a living thing, its tendrils curling like a living thing, its tendrils curling through the ruins, seeping into the cracks of broken stone, slithering through the remnants of shattered archways, as if drawn to the presence of something long forgotten. The silence deepened, stretching into something unnatural, something oppressive, as though the very air had been hollowed out, leaving behind only the weight of expectation. Even the distant sounds of the forest, the whisper of wind through the trees, the occasional call of a bird, the rustling of unseen creatures, had vanished. There was only this place, this moment, as if the world beyond the ruins had ceased to exist. Thranduil did not recoil, though he felt the change as keenly as a sudden shift in the current of a river. He had walked the halls of many ruins, had stood in the presence of power both fair and terrible, had gazed upon the remnants of fallen kingdoms and the scars they left upon the land. But this was different. There was no lingering rage here, no howling remnants of suffering or vengeance. Instead, there was something colder, something that had waited in silence for far, far too long. This was not a place of wrath. It was a place of patience. And patience, he knew, was far more dangerous. Galion took a step closer, though his movements were slow and deliberate, as if he too felt the shift in the air. "My lord," he said, his voice carefully measured, "this does not feel like the remnants of some forgotten sorcery. It is not the echo of something that is past, but rather the breath of something that is waiting to wake." His gaze flickered toward the book, his expression unreadable. "Are we certain this is something we wish to take with us?" Thranduil exhaled slowly, his fingers resting lightly against the surface of the book, not yet lifting it. "What do you fear, Galion? That by carrying it we shall carry with us whatever lingers here? That it will follow, unseen, unheard, yet present?" His gaze did not waver from the dark leather binding, its edges worn but not crumbling, the runes etched into its cover nearly faded but not forgotten. "Or do you fear that whatever left this here has not truly left at all?" Galion was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the ruins around them, taking in the way the mist curled unnaturally around the stones, the way the light seemed to dim the closer one stepped toward the book. "I fear that when one stirs the embers of an old fire, one does not always see the spark that catches until it is too late." He turned his gaze back to his king, his voice quieter now, more reflective. "You have always spoken of patience as a virtue, my lord. That wisdom is found in the willingness to wait, to listen, to move only when the time is right. But what if this," he gestured faintly toward the book, toward the way the air itself seemed to vibrate with something unspoken, "is something that has waited longer than it should? What if it is already decided that the time has come?" Thranduil lifted the book, feeling the weight of it settle against his palm. Not heavy, not burdened by its physical form, but by something unseen, something woven into the very fibers of its existence. He had held many things in his long life, blades bathed in the blood of battle, crowns woven from sorrow and duty, promises made in the silence of grief. And yet, as he held this, he felt none of those things. Instead, he felt only the hush of something listening. "Time does not wait for those who hesitate," he said at last, his voice quiet but firm. "The world is changing. The dominion of men has begun. The Eldar depart, and all that once was is fading into history. But history has never been content to remain in the past. It lingers, it calls, and it does not wait for the willing." He turned his gaze toward Galion then, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes as sharp as the edge of a blade. "If there are those who would seek to reclaim what was once lost, then they will not be stopped by our reluctance. We do not yet know what this is, but if we leave it here, if we turn away, we risk allowing it to fall into hands that do not seek knowledge, but power. And power, when wielded by the ignorant, is a weapon more dangerous than any blade." Leron, who had been watching in silence, exhaled softly. "Then we do not leave it behind," he said, though there was no triumph in his voice, only understanding. "But nor do we carry it blindly. If this book holds knowledge, then it must be read. And if it holds something more—" His fingers twitched faintly at his side, his posture tense but resolved. "Then it must be contained." Thranduil nodded once, turning the book over in his hands, his fingers tracing the faded runes, feeling the indentations of the script beneath his touch. "We return to the Woodland Realm," he said at last, his decision made. "We will take it to the deepest chambers of my halls, where the light does not touch, and where prying hands will not find it. And there we will see if it speaks." The mist swirled at their feet as they turned, moving once more through the broken remnants of the fortress, their steps careful but unhurried, their senses attuned to the silent weight of the ruins behind them. The feeling of being watched did not fade, nor did the hush that clung to the air. It was as if the place itself had taken a breath and held it, waiting. As they reached their horses, the silence finally broke. Not with words, not with sound, but with a shift in the air, a whisper of wind that had not been there before. It carried no voice, no clear message, only a feeling, a sensation that ran like ice along the skin, a quiet knowing. Thranduil mounted his steed, his fingers tightening slightly around the book as he looked once more toward the ruins. The mist curled along the stones, settling once more into its patient stillness. And though nothing moved, though no presence revealed itself, he did not fool himself into believing they had left it behind. The past had awoken, and it had not yet spoken its full name. The return through the forest was quieter than before, though not with the hush of peace, but the kind of silence that followed a decision that could not be undone. The horses moved steadily beneath the dense canopy, their hooves pressing into the damp earth, their breath rising in faint clouds against the morning chill. The mist, which had thickened so unnaturally within the ruins of Dol Guldur, began to thin as they rode, curling away like a hand withdrawing, no longer grasping at their presence. And yet, even as it faded, something of it remained, an impression, a weight that did not lift, as if what they had disturbed still clung to them, unseen. Thranduil rode at the head of the company, the book secured within the folds of his cloak, though he was acutely aware of its presence, of the way it seemed to press against him, heavier than mere parchment and ink had any right to be. He did not open it, not yet. There would be time for that, time to determine whether what it held was knowledge or something more dangerous. But as he rode beneath the high-reaching boughs of the trees that had stood for ages beyond counting, he could not shake the thought that the book was not merely something found, but something placed, not abandoned, but left to be taken. Galion rode beside him, his expression thoughtful, his gaze flickering between the path ahead and the forest beyond, as though he too sensed the lingering shadow at their backs. At last he spoke, his voice quiet and reflective. "I have long served you, my lord, and in all these years I have watched you weigh many decisions, each with the careful patience of one who understands that every choice leaves its mark upon the world. But I wonder now, do you believe this was the right path? To take this book from its place, to bring it into our halls, we do not yet know what it holds, and yet we carry it as though it is merely another relic of the past, But relics, my lord, are often more than they seem. Thranduil's gaze did not shift from the path ahead, though his thoughts turned inward, tracing the memories of the past, the choices made, the echoes of them still carried through time. "The past does not remain buried, Galion," he said at last, his voice measured, though it carried the weight of years. "We tell ourselves that it does, that what has come before is behind us, that we are free to walk forward without looking back. But time does not move in a straight line. It bends, it coils, it circles back upon itself. And those who do not understand this find themselves ensnared by what they believed had been left behind. And signs are meant to be heeded. To leave this book where it lay would not have been wisdom, but blindness. A thing forgotten does not mean a thing undone." Galion was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed slightly, as if measuring his next words with the same careful thought he had always given in service to his king. "And yet, there are things that are meant to be forgotten," he murmured, though there was no challenge in his tone, only quiet contemplation. "There are doors that are meant to remain closed, not because they were sealed unjustly, but because what lies beyond them is not meant for the hands of those who walk this world now. There is knowledge that is not meant to be known, power that is not meant to be wielded. And I wonder, my lord, if we will find that this is one of those things." Thranduil turned his gaze toward him then, and there was something in his eyes that was not fear, but an understanding that carried its own weight. "Perhaps," he said, "but we will not know until we look, and if we do not look, then we do not prepare. If something stirs in the ruins of Dol Guldur, it is not because we have taken this book, but because it was always waiting. We do not create the tides, Galion. We only decide how we stand against them." The conversation faded into silence, but the air between them was not empty. It was filled with the quiet hum of thought, the unspoken understanding that though they rode beneath the golden light of the morning, they carried with them something that did not belong to the daylight. Hours passed, and the trees of Laskalin grew denser, their boughs arching high above like the vaulted ceilings of an ancient hall, their leaves whispering as the wind stirred through them, as though the forest itself had sensed the shift in its king. The Woodland Realm was not like the ruins of Dol Guldur. It was alive, breathing, and within its depths the weight of ages had not twisted it into shadow, but strengthened it, as roots grow deep to hold against the storm. By the time they reached the great gates of Thranduil's halls, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shafts of light through the towering trees, painting the stone entrance in hues of amber and gold. The guards who stood watch at the gates bowed low as their king passed, their keen eyes flickering toward the cloak he carried, though they did not question what lay within. The warriors dismounted, leading their steeds away in silence, their expressions grim but resolute. Even if they did not yet know what they had brought back with them, they understood that it was not a mere relic, not a mere artifact of history. It was something that had been left to be found, and it was now within their walls. Thranduil walked through the great corridors of his halls, the torchlight flickering against the smooth stone, casting long shadows that shifted with each step. The Woodland Realm had always been a place of sanctuary, a fortress of the Eldar that had withstood the tides of war, the encroachment of shadow, and the passage of time itself. But now, as he descended into the lower chambers, into the deep vaults where the light of day did not reach, He wondered if even these walls could contain what they had carried home. The chamber he chose was deep within the heart of his halls, a place where few ever walked, where the air was still, where secrets could remain undisturbed. The stone here was smooth and ancient, carved by hands that had long since departed, the air thick with the scent of old wood, of parchment, of something untouched by the world above. He placed the book upon a table of polished oak, his fingers lingering upon the leather binding for a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting for it to reveal something of itself. But it remained still, silent, unmoving. Galion stood a few steps behind, watching. "And now?" he asked, his voice quiet, as though the very walls were listening. Thranduil exhaled slowly. "Now we learn what it wishes to tell us." The book lay before him, its darkened pages waiting. Outside, beyond the halls, beyond the borders of the realm, the forest stretched into the vastness of Middle-earth. And in the distance, where the ruins of Dol Guldur stood beneath the shifting mist, the silence was no longer empty. Something had changed. And though it had not yet spoken, it was listening, and it would not wait forever.